First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of the background. Modern healthcare, hospitals are getting fewer hospital beds, but there's one group that's increasing in size, and these are intensive care unit patients. Predicted to occupy almost 30% of hospital beds at university hospitals by 2020. And the reason for this, of course, improved knowledge, better survival, and the better survival was in part due to better knowledge and better treatments, but not the least, the introduction of evidence-based medicine, removing intervention that being more harmful than helpful to the patients. But anesthesiologists and critical care physicians are very skilled and improve survival, and also with this modern critical care also comes complications, not the least affecting skeletal muscle. And I'll talk about these two entities, the critical illness myopathy, which was actually described the first time in a short report in the Lancet. A young woman with a status asthmaticus attack came to the emergency room. She had to be transferred to the ICU because she could not be, it was not sufficient what they could offer at the ER. And there she was giving massive doses of corticosteroids. And also to ensure oxygenation of the central nervous system, she was hooked up with a ventilator. And at that time, pharmacological paralysis was frequently used. But then when infection was cured, after about a week or 10 days, when they tried to wean her off the ventilator, they found that she was completely quadriplegic. She couldn't move any limb muscles. She had intact cognitive function and intact sensory function. But she recovered after a couple of months and she became almost fully mobile, and this was considered to be a rare condition of limited clinical significance. I see almost one patient a week with this. And I think, and it's any ICU, if you go there, you can find these patients. And so it is not rare. It has been misdiagnosed for decades as an acquired neuropathy because of misinterpretation of electrophysiological signals. It is actually primary myopathy, and I'll come back to this. I had heard about this disease by George Capote when I visited our hospital many years ago. I was on call Christmas '95, and then there was a neurologist from another hospital in Stockholm. Some of you know him very well, Jörgen Borg. He had this strange patient that had developed a quadriplegia. And he had done extensive investigation, done CT of the central nervous system, MRI of the brainstem, and also looked at spinal fluid. And there was not this typical protein peak that you see in patients with this acquired Guillain-Barré syndrome. So it was considered to be a variant of Guillain-Barré. But Jörgen Borg, being a very careful neurologist, he wanted me to go there and do our electrophysiological tricks, so to say. And it definitely indicated an acquired motor actionopathy, but also took a muscle biopsy. Went back to the lab, pulled out single cells, and this is a normal muscle cell under relaxing condition and maximum activating condition, and this is from the patient. It doesn't take a trained eye to see something is wrong with this fiber. The normal cross-direction pattern is lost, and the fiber develops zero force upon maximum calcium activation. And then we solubilize these cells around on the gel. In humans, you know, we have 3 myosin heavy chain isoforms, and these are single cells from the patient. You didn't see any myosin. But these are also atrophic fibers, so loaded bundles with 10 to 20 fibers here. We still don't see any myosin. We run it on a different gel system where we can look at both smaller proteins as well. And 1, 2, and 3 is from a patient with an hemiplegia due to a central lesion. You can see full expression of thick filament proteins on both on paretic and non-paretic side. The patient, no myosin, but thin filament proteins are expressed. Actin, regulatory proteins, etc. And then just by looking around, we found 10 patients in no time really in Stockholm area. And so this is just an EM picture showing the same thing. This is control C-line, C-line, A-line, patient, C-line, no A-line. Not so surprising the patient was paralyzed. And then at that time, Stefano Schiaffino set up this in situ hybridization. We look at the RNA expression for actin, and the 3 isoforms and immunocytochemistry, myosin. There's no transcript for myosin either. So this is dramatic downregulation of protein synthesis at transcription level. Unfortunately, this patient died. This is another patient, also showing the same picture. No transcript for actin, transcript for actin but not for myosin, but there's protein here. And these cells develop some force upon maximum calcium activation, but not less than normal. This patient then, so it tells us the myosin loss is not the only factor underlying this quadriplegia. It's actually much less excitable muscle membrane. And that's also why when we do electrophysiology and misinterpret this, of course. And he fully recovered, and then we had a full expression at the mRNA level. Yeah, and we can stop this. And this is just showing the good thing is if the patient survives the primary disease, there's almost full recovery. So you can see this following cross-striation pattern comes back, forwards, and there's a re-expression of the thick filament proteins. The problem, and of course, and this is the other entity that we're also interested in, it's called this ventilator-induced diaphragm muscle dysfunction. 40% of the time, the patients are on the ventilator is just weaning the patient off the ventilator because the diaphragm muscle is severely affected by long-term mechanical ventilation. And then there is a group of patients that stay on the ventilator for months, up to a year, because the diaphragm is too weak to wean them off the ventilator. And these patients, it's not a trivial problem, of course not for the patient with the morbidity and mortality, but also healthcare costs. And these patients have been it's considered to cost about $64 billion annually in just increased healthcare costs. So it's not a trivial problem. So to try to understand mechanisms, it's very difficult to do this in an ICU population, because of differences in underlying disease, polypharmacy, etc. So we have to move into different experimental animal models. And we started working in a pig model, and we went up to 5 days. That gave us some information, but 5 days is too short, to develop this paralysis. And let's see. Doesn't matter. So we moved into the rodent model instead, where we have a pharmacologically paralyzed rat. It's paralyzed postsynaptic alpha-gobra-toxin. And then, of course, we need to mechanically ventilate the rat as well. So we worked with Barry Walken, who developed this at Rockefeller a long time ago and modified it for our study. And then these rats are extensively monitored. And that's the longest duration a rat has been on this intervention is 96 days. So, and it requires 24-hour monitoring. It's kind of demanding experiments, of course. We don't go up to more than 10 days, which is more than enough to develop the genotype and the phenotype that we see in these ICU patients. So we monitor them, the CO2 in the expiratory gas, the EEG to make sure these rats are fully sedated. And this is look at the pressure in the respiratory system for each breath, ECG, intraarterial blood pressure, venous pressure, body temperature, and a couple of other things as well. And the interesting thing is that these rats, they develop the same phenotype and genotype as we see in the ICU patient with this quadriplegia. There's a preferential loss of myosin and a dramatic loss in force generating capacity. And we also have this, when we look on the myosin content versus actin content in fast and slow twitch muscles, we see the same thing as we see in the patients. And we then looked at, and of course, then also transcription downregulation at durations longer than 5 days. And we look at the activation of different proteolytic pathways. I talked about this before, so I skipped over this. And one other thing that is kind of interesting with these patients, as well as in the experimental animal models, craniofacial muscles are typically spared. So these patients can communicate with facial expression, but they cannot move their limbs, and some of them are also still on the ventilator, so they can't walk, so to say. And it's the same thing when we go to the craniofacial muscle. There's much less loss in myosin. And in the diaphragm, the mechanisms are completely different. It also affects myosin, but we don't have a preferential myosin loss, and we don't have a transcription downregulation, but we have massive myosin post-translational modification that affects the myosin function. And that's something we've shown both at the single cell level as well as at the motor protein level. We confirm this with different methods. But what I would like to talk about here, since we have the expertise in electrical stimulation, we looked at different intervention strategies. And what we're primarily working on are these pharmacological interventions. And this chaperone co-induced BDP15, which upregulates heat shock protein 7072. dramatic effects on improving diaphragm muscle function. And actually we hope finally we can get into the clinical research later this year. But what I'd like to talk about else here is because which are the triggering factors? It has been considered to be corticosteroids, neuromuscular blockers, and sepsis. But you can see this in patients without any of these interventions. And I don't think they are really important. It's like gasoline on fire. If you give massive doses of steroids on an immobilized patient, it will get worse. But it's not the most important triggering factor. But what all these patients have in common is long-term mechanical ventilation and complete immobilization. And it's a type of immobilization you don't see in any other clinical condition or experimental condition. It's what Matthias Gautel said, complete mechanical silencing. No weight bearing, no internal strain related to activation of contractile proteins. And we looked at this with Matthias a long time ago and looked at this E3 ligases, and we thought at that time we understood everything. I don't think we do it any longer though. But then we could show that it was an activation of these E3 ligases. But it was not only about levels, it was also about location. So there was a transient transition into the nuclear and then going out in the cytoplasm. We thought this was going into the nuclear effect and transcription, then going out in the cytoplasm, triggering the degradation. I don't think it's that simple any longer. But mechanosensation, I think, is an important factor underlying the activation of different proteolytic pathways, etc. And then mechanosensors in skeletal muscle, all the way from outside in the integrins, in the extracellular matrix, binding to structural actin that binds to mitochondria. Mitochondria is a mechanosensor. Binding to the nucleus, even the nucleus is a mechanosensor. You have mechanosensitive elements in the intermediate filament and all the way into the center of this organ. So, yeah, and I should tell, so this is just an anecdotal finding as well. This picture here is a very sad story. It was a young boy waiting for lung transplant, and he was on massive doses of steroids as well. And unfortunately, he did not survive. And this is a post-mortem biopsy. So what we see here are the sensory organ in the muscle spindles. And here you can see we have expression of myosin in the interfusal fibers. The extrafusal fibers here are completely devoid of myosin and extremely atrophic. I mean, extrafusal fibers should be like this size and no myosin. The difference, we think, the gamma motor neurons firing and keeping this muscle in tension, so to say, while the others are completely immobilized. May not be true, but that's what we hypothesized. So we did a simple intervention in the rodent. We put a servo motor driving in the ankle joint 13 times per minute for 12 hours, and then on one leg, and then comparing with the other leg. And by doing so, we did not eliminate muscle wasting, but we reduced muscle wasting compared to the contralateral side. It improved the fiber size, but also force generating capacity on the loaded versus the unloaded side. So this is our sort of experimental physical therapist. We think this is an important intervention in the ICU, early physical therapy, not coming out to 3 months to prevent joint contractions, going in on day 1, mobilizing the patient. And we did a similar experiment in humans as well with this machine, and it also improved the force generating capacity at the single cell level. We couldn't see an effect on muscle fiber size. And so which are the mechanisms here with this mechanical loading? We don't really see an effect on the antigens. They are upregulated, but there's no difference on the loaded versus the unloaded sides. But we look on these other three E3 ligases. This was done together with Michael Sandri here. It really takes away this increase in these E3 ligases that are also upregulated at the time when we have significant muscle wasting. And it's not the only thing. It also affects mitochondria, both fission, fusion, and mitophagy. And it also affects apoptotic pathways. And also this was kind of a trivial experiment, also showing that we have leakage of IgG positive fibers on the unloaded versus the loaded fiber, and also much fewer necrotic fibers on the loaded versus the unloaded side. So once again, early mobilization, I think, is sort of the take-home message from this experimental models. But what I really would like to share with you right now, and I stick out my chin and you can knock me out because I'm a little bit of a novice here when it comes to electrical stimulation, but I know that I have the expertise here in the room. But I consulted with Terry Löhmer, which is also, as you know very well, is well acquainted with chronic electrical stimulation. So I did implant electrode on the soleus muscle, and these are paralyzed muscles. It's direct muscle stimulation. I put electrodes on both sides, but only stimulated on one side. And it's a unilateral stimulation of the soleus muscle, 20 Hz bipolar stimulation, 10 seconds every 30 seconds, 12 hours per day for 8 days. And we use constant current, typically less than 20 milliamp, often less than 10 milliamps. And they are completely paralyzed. It's mechanical ventilated spray-golded female rats. And we use Teflon-coated wires, which are uncoated at the pyramid. We put one on the anterior and one on the posterior side over the soleus muscle to do this direct stimulation. And these are just controlled rats, body weight. They weigh around 300 grams. These are in the mechanically lowered rats. We do have loss in body weight, and we have a loss in body weight in the electrically stimulated rats as well. And I should say that these were 6 and 7 rats in each group, so it's not a huge sample. So you have to bear this in mind when we do the statistical analysis. And then when we started this experiment, I was kind of puzzled because I thought I saw so small differences with the electrical stimulation, because these are stimulated 3 times as many times as with mechanical loading. The absolute weight compared to controls. So what we could see then, we don't really, there is average or lower, but also significantly lower in the electrical stimulated. But they are heavier than in the mechanically loaded. And actually there is no significant difference between the muscle weights in the soleus on the electrical stimulated versus the unstimulated side. And when we do the pair test, that's not the difference in the stimulated, the unstimulated side as well. And we can see a similar effect when we look at all these hind muscles. So at least to me, this indicates we have a crossover effect with electrical stimulation, not only affecting the soleus muscle on the stimulated side, but also on the contralateral side. And when we look at mice and actin ratios as well, it improves it slightly with mechanical ventilation, but the same thing with electrical stimulation. But once again, we have an effect on the unloaded side as well, on the unstimulated side. Once again, crossover effect. I don't have the pictures here. We also look on the morphology with neuromuscular junction. There we also have a crossover effect with this unilateral electrical stimulation. So, and also, I think this also tells us that this complete immobilization, the mechanical silencing, is not the only factor driving this loss in preferential loss of myosin, because then it should be restored. There are other factors as well, and another factor that's probably even more important. We have an idea what it is, and we're going after it as well, but we don't know what it is right now. So the pilot results from this unilateral mechanical versus electrical stimulation. We have reduced muscle weights in response to the ICU condition, but I think we really have also a crossover effect here with electrical, but not with mechanical stimulation. And of course, a difference here as well, and because what we hypothesize that this is related with electrical stimulation, we also have calcium release, which we don't have with mechanical stimulation. And of course, calcium release is also a factor that stimulates microvascular release with factors that have distant effects, endocrine, paracrine, and exocrine effects. So that is what we're going after as well. And I know some of you will also say it's probably an IGF-related factor, and that could very well be. The interesting thing, though, in the mechanical loading, where we don't have crossover effect, there's no increase in the IGF. We have not come that far in the analysis of these samples. And so further studies are needed, and this is what we're going after. Initially, I was not so excited about this. I think it was just something we have to push through and do. But now this was unexpected, and I think it triggered my interest as well. So we want to go further and try to nail it down to see what really the underlying mechanism is. So, of course, I have to thank everyone in the lab. Nicola is our current Padova member, and he sent greetings to all of you here. So, and of course, this is the people I mean, they do all the work, and it's a very heterogeneous group. We work together and enjoy working as well. But also, we would never work without our international friends either. Many of you are here in the room as well, and so thank you all, and thank you for your attention.
I'm just curious, you said that the patients you work with, most of them are on high levels of steroids?
No, they're not. This was what, the initial patient was on high levels of steroids, and they were on non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocking agents as well. But this is something that is really not in use any longer. But actually, I have to say, when we test prednisone in the animal model, and this is kind of controversial with the effects of steroids in these patients, because in massive doses, of course, steroids have a detrimental effect on muscle size and muscle wasting. But in clinical dose, this actually improves in the experimental animal model. And then I think the anti-inflammatory effect is important. And that is also an important triggering factor here as well.
So another question I have is, you said, if I understood right, was it one of the rats that, or a set of the rats that you kept on the critical care unit protocol for 96 days?
We haven't done it, but Barry did that once upon a time.
I'm sorry?
Barry Dworkin, who developed the model at Rockefeller 40 years ago, his record is 96 days. And I can tell you it's a record we will not try to break.
Mm-hmm. So what is the longest you've kept them on?
The longest we've done is 14 days.
14 days.
Because, and the interesting thing, that the phenotype and the genotype comes after exposure to these ICU conditions for 5 days and longer. It's the same in patients, same in rats, and probably the same in pigs as well. Never went longer than 5 days in the pig. And they actually never show this preferential myosin. And in the pigs, we actually exposed them to these triggering factors, blockers. They all had deep sedation, mechanical ventilation, and then we added corticosteroids, neuromuscular blockers, and sepsis, and all combined. And that actually led us to study chaperone co-inducers, because heat shock proteins appear to have a protecting effect here. So that's why we got this VGP-15, which actually improves the function of the diaphragm by protecting myosin from post-translation modification. It improves force generating capacity by 100%.
Okay, so you've worked with both diaphragm and with limb muscles. Do you find anything that's strikingly different between the two muscles in terms of their response? What is most striking?
No, because the striking difference in the diaphragm, we don't have preferential myosin loss. And there's no transcription downregulation. And of course, we have mechanical loading there all the time because of the ventilator, 72 times per minute actually. So it's, and also the diaphragm is a very different muscle.
Right.
It has a phylogenetic background, it's kind of embryological background is different. And of course the craniofacial muscle, they stem from the branchial arch and the spine from the somites. And they will have different protein expression, different membrane properties. And I think the diaphragm is somewhere in between. But it could also be that the constant mechanical loading there. And yeah. So what do we think is the most important triggering factor? I think it's ventilator-induced lung injury. And the release of factors from the lung that has distant effects on peripheral organs, including muscle. That's our current hypothesis. It may change, but that's our current what we have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last week, with the electrical stimulation that you've chosen, do you see movement in stimulated?
Sure. It goes like this. So of course, and this is something we monitor all the time, that we have this for 10 seconds every 30 seconds, and we do it 12 hours per day. We don't go the 24 hours, and the reason for that is we record lab. We only have one stimulator, and we run 2 rats at the same time. So 12 hours on one, 12 hours on the other.
The fact that the electrodes are on the cells really stimulating the whole limb.
No, it's actually stimulating the soldiers. It may, because first of all, I put the one electrode on top, on the anterior surface, and the other one on the posterior. Of course, they may be spread to other muscles as well, of course. But it's primarily the soleus muscle being activated.
Why did you choose that?
Yeah, we had to start somewhere. And so...
Easier to put them on into the anterior.
Yeah, but I think of course the typical muscles you go for in the hind limb is EDL and soleus.
Yeah.
Small size, you can do total fiber counts, and you can do, and that's where we have the background knowledge as well. We come to contractile property at the single cell and multi-protein levels as well. So, and I think in one way I also felt that maybe there's no really big difference between different muscle types, but if anything, the slow fibers are affected more because they have a faster turnover of proteins.
Yeah.
And if you shut down protein synthesis at the transcription level, I think you will find it easier in the muscle where there's a faster turnover of proteins than in slow turnover.
Did you consider using a higher frequency to generate tetanic contractions rather than the slow?
No, we just used Terrier's stimulus paradigm. Of course, we can use anything. It's just these are demanding experiments, really.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in a mechanical trigger,
Yeah.
then the peak forces will be very low at 20 hertz, whether if you use the 100 hertz.
Yeah, but still, we have activation of contractile proteins, which is the difference between the mechanical loading where they're completely paralyzed. At least we have the shear stress induced by activation of contractile proteins. And actually the difference is not that big compared with just passive loading, and that's 13 times per minute. And these are activated at least 3 times, I think it's like 26,000 times in 12 hours. So 3 times as many times, and still the net effect is not that big. But the crossover effect is significant, I think. And I think this is really what intrigued us, and because I thought we just need to do this, work this through, but now we found something. Maybe it will not hold true, but I think so far I'm quite convinced that there is this strong crossover, and I think that's physiologically relevant as well. I think you'll be first.
What type of electrodes did you use?
Yeah, I think I showed it. These are these Teflon-coated wires that we bought from the US, and then I just burned the tip so they're uncoated.
Was the wire placed up and
on anterior and posterior surface.
Okay.
And actually I did the same thing on the contralateral side, just to avoid that there's sort of an effect with the edema or whatever.
So you were not going for the nerve innervating the muscle?
No, because it's pharmacologically paralyzed. If you stimulate the nerve, you'll get no response.
Okay, so it's direct muscle.
Yeah, direct muscle.
Which parameter do you use? The same parameter in rodents and in humans? Which parameter do you use in the ICU?
We've never done chronic stimulations in the humans. We're not there yet.
But this parameter is only for rodents.
This is for rodents. And so we used an established paradigm, and I respect Terry highly, really, and he helped me when we set this up as well. So it's, and as I said, I'm a novice here, but it showed something that triggered my interest, at least. And because I think if there is this massive crossover effect, that could have clinical implications as well. And I think, why do we see this dramatic crossover effect that has not been reported in the past during chronic? I think, just speculating, I think because here we have a muscle that has no motor neuron input on the contralateral side. And so there's no, and so I think it's more receptive perhaps to circulating factors. This is, once again, it's just an hypothesis.
But how you explain the cross effects without the nerves? It ought to be something circulating.
Yeah, of course. And of course we know microvesicles are playing factors including microRNA, RNA, proteins, myokines are circulating. And the release of the myosin is stimulated by calcium. And this is the difference between mechanical versus electrical. In mechanical we have no calcium, but it could also be myokines. It could be IGF-1 circulating because it even seems like body weight is less reduced when we do the electrical versus the mechanical loading.
And you're confident of the statistics?
Excuse me?
You're confident of the statistics?
Yeah, the statistic is kind of... It's, and I mean, these are paired t-tests, and one way allow us. And it's a small group. And of course, what we need to add here as well are controls 8 days before and after. We have lots of controls, but unfortunately not 8 days where we've done this. So this is something we're going to start April 8th, and then run just controls then to get sufficient hand size, so we can see what the muscle wasting is on just without these interventions.
I've been informed by Professor Ferraro that we have some extra minutes, so we take the last two questions. And this,
sure.
Oh, 1, 2, no, 1, 2, and 3.
As you said, there is a difference in the calcium with the mechanical and electrical stimulation.
Because with electricals we have a depolarization, we have easy coupling and release of calcium in the activator of the contractile proteins.
Yes.
I don't think we have that with the we haven't measured calcium, but I doubt that. But this is just passive movement, and I don't think that would travel to
But the mechanical receptor in the sarcolemma.
Yeah, I think as we showed, mitochondria are mechanically sensitive. And of course it has a strong impact. We've done that together with Marco. And of course Marco knows very well also the mitochondria is playing a very important role in muscle atrophy. So that's one factor. It affects apoptotic pathways. It affects the proteolytic pathways as well by pure mechanical sensation. We haven't come that far with the electric. These are just recent data, but I really wanted to share it with you and get your opinion here. So it's unpublished.
Just a short
Question over
there.
there.
Already been answered by Christian question. So you stimulated the slaves, so the rest was pharmacologically fertilized, and it was only the slaves that were contracted. So you increased the amplitude with this 20 hertz of stimulation, and then you saw contractions on the slaves.
Well, I can only see I can't see if it's only muscle, but it's only these counterflexors that are activated. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it's solid because you see it in the toes and it goes this way. And of course it increases with the increasing in the duration, and then it stops, comes back next 30 seconds.
Okay.
And all muscles are pharmacologically paralyzed.
Martin, just a comment regarding the use of the 20 hertz current. I think it's perfectly sensible because considering the shape of the force frequency curve at 20 hertz, we're developing 75% of the time force.
You get fusion with 20 hertz stimulation of the soleus muscle.
Yeah.
Many years ago, we did these studies at the motor unit and muscle level, so to say. So you get you don't get a fully fused tetanus, but you get a significant fusion for sure. So.
Okay, well, we thank again